Hello and welcome to Meditation Practices for the Quantum Mind. I am your instructor and guide for this free course on Udemy. My name is Dr. Samar Habib, and this is a complimentary course that is a supplement to the Quantum Mind, Stop Suffering and Take Back Your Life, which is also available here on Udemy. And my plan here is to give you an introduction to different aspects of the mind. So we are really looking at the idea of suffering. You know, how is suffering created? How is it sustained in the mind and in the brain? And what are some of the techniques and practices that are non-medical that are involved in mitigating that suffering, disrupting it, and returning us to a state of being able to self-regulate. There are numerous neurological studies that demonstrate that the thinking aspects of our brain are a result of activity between different networks within the brain. And so let me give you a quick example. So when we are, for example, focused on a specific task that we're trying to get done, in neuroscience there are certain networks in the brain that are labeled the task positive network. And when we're focused on a particular activity, obviously we're kind of very present within it, right? And we're not likely to be harboring or sustaining the kind of automatic thinking that happens just after we finish a task or when we're not really doing anything. So when we're sitting on the bus on a commute, to work, and we just let our thoughts kind of wander, and that internal monologue that we have, well, that's called or that's considered to be the result of a series of networks within the brain that are referred to as default mode network. And so our minds are really a product of these types of brain activity. Now, in meditation, the idea is to really disrupt the default mode network. It's to really stop that kind of automatic internal chatter that's sometimes referred to as the monkey mind. And a lot of situations such as depression, anxiety, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, these things, neuroscientists hypothesize, are exacerbated or are a result of when the default mode network is hijacked, right? Or hijacks our ability to be present with a particular experience, to be able to focus on a particular task. And so, as you know, in the purpose of most meditations is to train our ability to be present, to focus on a singular point without letting our minds wander. And in most meditative practices, the whole idea is to bring your focus back as soon as you realize you've broken off, right? So whether that's, being focused on your breath or being focused on a particular spot, a few feet in front of you, or, being focused on retaining kind of an empty mind, so kind of widening the gaps between thoughts and that sort of thing. So essentially, if we were to describe that in neurological terminology, what we would be saying is that, we're keeping the default mode network under wraps, we're minimizing its activity, and just because that's the task of meditation, we've now engaged the task positive network. So naturally, understandably, if we start to narrate our, suffering, whatever it is we're upset about, if we don't kind of engage with the content of it, with the narrative of it, with the details and specifics of it, and we just start to address the structure of how sustaining the narrative of our suffering is even possible, then we have a chance to mitigate that suffering on a structural level. And so in my experiences with mitigating suffering, I find that that's kind of like the fastest and surest way of short-circuiting suffering, is that to address it at a structural rather than a contextual or content-driven level. And so what I'd like to do is, I recently did this with a friend of mine. He asked me to teach him how to meditate. And in my experience, nobody taught me how to meditate. I made a decision that I would meditate every day for 20 minutes a few years ago. And it was one of the most amazing lifestyle changes I undertook. It really changed my life and the way I perceived my cognitive abilities and what I could do with my mind. And when we sat down together, I very clearly understood how to demonstrate to him the different anatomies of the mind, and just to get him to understand that if he is suffering, if he's having a challenging time with his life, the first thing to know or be aware of is that you're not your thoughts, and that our thoughts are not necessarily true. Just because we're having them and they elicit strong emotions in us, that doesn't necessarily make them real. Yes, we are having those feelings. Yes, we are having those thoughts, but those thoughts are not necessarily reflective of, an external reality, or at least an objective external reality. So what I'm going to do with you now is an induction into meditative practices. This is very useful for anybody who has never meditated before, or for anybody who wants to understand the relationship between suffering and the mind. And we're going to do this in 5-minute segments. And then you'll hear this sound at the end of the 5 minutes. So what we're going to do is, let's pick a nice quiet place, but you don't need a quiet place to meditate. And I'm going to show you a little later on how to use sound to be able to meditate, to be able to fully concentrate.